My parents didn't want me at Thanksgiving. Dad said, "Your sister's new fiancé wants a classy dinner. Your restaurant uniform would ruin the photos." I whispered, "Okay, got it." But the next morning, they burst into my apartment demanding answers, and when her fiancé saw me, he said one sentence that left everyone frozen. "Hi, my name is Elena Brooks, I'm 30 years old, and most days, I carry the smell of wood-fired ovens and roasted herbs on my clothes like a second skin. I'm a sous chef at a fine dining restaurant in downtown Portland, Oregon, a place where the kitchen never truly sleeps and where I've poured more of myself than anyone in my family has ever cared to ask. But I love what I do. The burns on my forearms, the ache in my shoulders, the hours spent perfecting the crackle of duck skin or the silkiness of mushroom risotto, they've always made more sense to me than the world I grew up in. My family worships image. Presentation. Perfection that photographs well. My younger sister, Lydia, 27, is the golden child of that world. She's flawless in every picture, every angle, every curated moment she shares with her hundreds of thousands of followers. My parents beam with pride at her collaborations, her sponsored posts, her polished lifestyle. And for as long as I can remember, I've been the shadow next to her spotlight, the sister who came home smelling like garlic, onions, and smoke. Less classy. My mother once said under her breath at a family gathering, as if I were a stain on a designer tablecloth she didn't know how to scrub out. It was 1 week before Thanksgiving when everything began the unraveling that, at the time, I didn't yet recognize as the beginning of my freedom. I had just locked my apartment door behind me, apron folded under my arm, keys in hand, when my phone buzzed. Dad. I hesitated a second before answering. Calls from him rarely meant anything good. "Elena," he said, voice clipped, businesslike, as though I were an employee who had disappointed him yet again. "Listen, we need to talk about Thanksgiving dinner." My stomach tightened. I didn't respond right away. He sighed sharply, impatient. "Lydia's fiancé, he wants a classy family dinner. Something elevated. We've been planning for weeks. And, well," he paused. But it wasn't hesitation, it was calculation. "Your restaurant uniform would ruin the image he's going for. Our guys." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Not because the words were new, they weren't. I'd lived my entire life being dressed down in subtle insults, backhanded critiques, and polite rejections. But something about hearing it so plainly, so unapologetically, hit deeper than usual. Maybe it was the casual cruelty. Maybe it was the way he said ruin, as though my presence alone stained everything around me. I swallowed, trying to steady my voice. "So, you don't want me there?" Silence answered me before he did. Then he cleared his throat. "It's just better for the family image, Elena. I'm sure you understand." Yes. I understood far too well. The same old ache rose in my chest, sharp, then dull, then numbing all at once. A familiar cycle. A familiar wound. But still, it hurt like it had been freshly carved. I pressed my thumb hard against my keys, grounding myself. Then, as quietly as a breath slipping through cracked glass, I said, "Yes, I understand." And before the tremor in my voice could betray me, I ended the call. My hand lingered around the phone long after the screen went dark. The silence in the hallway felt heavy, like it pressed against my ribs from the inside. It shouldn't have hurt this much. It shouldn't have made me feel 12 years old again, standing in the corner while everyone fussed over Lydia's recital dress. It shouldn't have cut this deep, but it did. Because beneath everything, beneath the uniform they hated, beneath the work they didn't respect, beneath the life they never bothered to learn about, I was still their daughter. And some small part of me still wished that meant something. I inhaled slowly, forcing my lungs to expand even though they didn't want to. Then I walked to my car. The morning air was cold enough to sting, fog drifting low over the quiet Portland street. As I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, the thoughts I tried to push away only grew louder. They didn't want me there. They didn't want me in the picture. They didn't want me in their version of a perfect holiday. But there was another truth buried beneath the hurt, something steadier, something warmer. I had somewhere else to be. Somewhere I was needed. Somewhere I belonged, even if not by blood. Thanksgiving at the restaurant wasn't a fancy affair, it wasn't even a reservation night. It was our annual community outreach event, a tradition started by our head chef years ago. We cooked for people who had no family table to sit at, people who were grateful for a hot meal, not for how it looked on Instagram. And in that kitchen, amid the heat, the noise, the chaos, I wasn't less classy. I wasn't an embarrassment. I wasn't a shadow. I was Elena Brooks, the one who sautéed with instinct, plated with heart, and stayed late to make sure every kid who walked through our doors left with a full stomach and a warm cookie. As I drove toward the restaurant, the city slowly waking up around me, the initial sting of my father's words settled into something quieter, colder, but more resolute. They didn't want me at their Thanksgiving. Fine. I didn't need to fight for a seat at a table that was never meant for me. I had a different table waiting, one where I wasn't invisible, one where my work meant more than the clothes I wore, one where nobody cared if I smelled like smoke and rosemary. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, exhaled, and whispered to myself, "Just get through today." But deep down, beneath the numbness spreading through my chest, a small voice murmured, something else, something I wouldn't recognize fully until much later. Maybe this was the beginning of something I should have chosen a long time ago. Traffic was light that morning, the kind of quiet Portland dawn where the streets feel washed clean, as if the city itself hasn't quite woken up yet. My hands rested on the steering wheel, but my mind drifted somewhere far beyond the pavement, pulled backward by memories I never invited yet always carried with me. That call from my father had cracked something open, something old, something bruised, something I'd learned to tuck away behind long shifts and busy kitchens. But alone in the car, with nothing but the hum of the engine to keep me company, the past seeped in, unfiltered. I could still see Lydia at 8 years old, twirling in our living room in a sparkly dress, while Mom clapped like she was watching the finale of a Broadway show. "Look at her. She's a natural performer," Mom would say. Dad would nod proudly, phone in hand, already snapping pictures and videos to send to relatives. Lydia soaked it all up, sunlight on her skin, applause in her ears, attention as effortlessly as air. And then there was me. Flour on my face, sleeves rolled up, standing in Grandma's kitchen, with dough stuck beneath my nails and the happiest smile I'd ever worn. I wasn't graceful like Lydia. I wasn't shiny. I wasn't a spectacle. But when Grandma handed me a whisk or let me roll pastry dough, something inside me lit up, a warmth I couldn't find anywhere else. The smell of cinnamon, the sound of butter hissing in a pan, the rhythm of chopping vegetables, it felt like home in a way the rest of the house never did. Grandma used to say, "Flour on your face means you're doing life right, Ellie." No one else ever called me that. No one else ever looked at me the way she did, as though who I was, not who I could be molded into, mattered. My parents would pass by the kitchen, giving half-hearted smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "It's cute now," Dad once said to Mom, not knowing I was listening. "But she needs a real dream. Something respectable." Respectable. A word that clung to every conversation about Lydia and clashed with every conversation about me. In high school, the divide between us became even sharper. The day Lydia turned 16, there was a huge celebration in our driveway, a metallic blue car sitting under a giant gold bow, surrounded by balloons that shimmered in the sun. Lydia screamed. Mom cried. Dad grinned like he'd just handed her the world. It was a moment fit for social media long before social media ruled her life. When I turned 16, there wasn't a car in the driveway. There wasn't even a balloon. Mom slid a transit card into my hand before rushing off to help Lydia pick out outfits for her next dance recital. "Use the bus to get to school and your job," she said, as if it were normal, as if it were equal. That night, instead of celebrating, I stood behind the fryer at the diner where I worked the evening shift, the smell of oil clinging to my clothes long after I clocked out. But even then, I didn't resent the work. The kitchen, any kitchen, still felt like my place. Like freedom. While Lydia sparkled on stage, I learned how to plate dishes that made customers pause before taking their first bite. While she collected trophies, I collected recipes, scribbled notes from Grandma, experiments that sometimes failed spectacularly and sometimes became something magic. While Lydia was praised for her beauty, her posture, her poise, I learned to trust my senses. The sizzle that told me the pan was ready, the aroma that warned me something was burning, the texture that revealed whether dough needed more time. But none of that mattered to my parents. They cared about how things looked, not how they tasted. They cared about applause, not effort. They cared about Lydia's curated life, not the hours I spent learning to transform simple ingredients into something people would remember. To them, cooking was a hobby, a phase, an unremarkable skill, something lose-face when compared to Lydia's glamorous life. Yet, my dream never faded. It grew quietly inside me, the way yeast rises under a warm towel, slow, patient, unstoppable. I wanted to open my own restaurant someday. Not a pretentious, stiff-collared place like the ones Lydia posed in for pictures, but a warm, intimate space that honored the dishes Grandma taught me. A fusion of heritage, comfort, and creativity. A place where taste mattered more than image. But dreams like mine never earned applause at home. Whenever I talked about culinary school, Dad would shake his head. "It's not a real career, Elena." Mom would purse her lips. "You'll be on your feet all day. It's exhausting, messy work. It won't look good." And Lydia? She'd wrinkle her nose, glance at her manicured hands, and say, "You want to cook for people? Like, as a job?" As if I'd said I wanted to collect garbage off the street. The car ahead of me slowed, forcing me to ease off the gas. I blinked, pulling myself back into the present for a moment. Downtown was still miles away, but the weight in my chest felt heavier with every memory that surfaced. I tightened my grip on the wheel. It amazed me sometimes how people who raised me could know so little about who I actually was. They never understood that cooking wasn't something I did because I lacked options, it was who I was. It was the one place I felt whole, capable, seen. But to them, it was a flaw. Something unbecoming. Something embarrassing. Something unworthy of pride. As I made a turn onto Burnside, the restaurant still a short drive away, one truth settled in more clearly than ever: my family never once recognized my value. They only recognized the ways I didn't fit into their perfect picture. And for years, I let that shape me, bend me, quiet me. But as the sky brightened and the familiar silhouette of the restaurant appeared in the distance, a different thought rose quietly, stubbornly inside me. Maybe I didn't need their recognition to build the life I wanted. The road stretched ahead, open, steady, unbothered. And for the first time that morning, the ache in my chest eased, just a little. By the time I pulled into the back alley behind the restaurant, the sky had shifted from gray to the soft gold of early morning. The building stood quietly, its brick walls still cool from the night, but inside I knew it would soon be alive, alive in a way that felt different from any other day of the year. Our annual Thanksgiving outreach wasn't glamorous. It wasn't photographed for press or bragged about online the way Lydia documented every move she made. It wasn't curated. It wasn't staged. It was simply human. And it was mine. I entered through the staff door and immediately felt the familiar warmth of the kitchen envelop me, the hum of refrigerators, the faint scent of spices left from the night before, the comforting clatter of metal trays being arranged. A few volunteers were already there, bundled in jackets, rubbing their hands together for warmth as they greeted me with sleepy smiles. "Morning, Chef Elena." Miguel, our barista, said with a grin as he set up his mobile espresso cart. "Ready to caffeinate the city's toughest morning crowd?" "Only if you're prepared to be crowned their hero," I laughed, hanging my coat and pulling on my apron. Within minutes, the kitchen blossomed into motion. The single mothers who volunteered every year arrived with their kids bundled in scarves. Retired seniors shuffled in, eager to chop vegetables or ladle soup. A couple of my line cooks showed up even though they weren't scheduled, insisting they couldn't let Chef do this alone. And then there were the teens from the youth shelter. We'd taught them knife skills over the summer, and now they came back wanting to help. I walked from station to station, checking on trays of roasted carrots, stirring a huge pot of spiced pumpkin soup, tasting a glaze one of the volunteers was perfecting. Everything was simple food, but made with intention, with care. The kitchen's energy felt warm, buzzing, alive. Nothing like the suffocating energy of my parents' home, where every interaction was measured, evaluated, graded. Here, People simply existed, and I existed with them. By 9 a.m., the front doors opened, and the dining area decorated with construction paper turkeys and mismatched tablecloths began filling with people. Families in difficult circumstances, elderly folks without relatives, homeless neighbors who knew our staff by name, kids with wide eyes and shy smiles. The room transformed from quiet to vibrant, like someone had turned the lights on inside every soul that stepped in. I carried a tray of rolls past the tables, greeting people as I went. "Thank you, chef," an older man said, voice raspy from the cold. A young woman balancing two toddlers nodded gratefully when I refilled her plate. A group of teenage boys devoured everything like they hadn't eaten in days. Maybe they hadn't. Then there was the little boy, a gap-toothed kid no older than 7 who tugged on my sleeve while I was stirring a pot of gravy. When I looked down, he held out a small star cut from yellow paper, the edges uneven, clearly snipped with dull scissors. He placed it in my hand with a solemnity that surprised me. "For you," he said. "So, you don't forget us, chef." I froze for a moment, the star small and warm in my fingers. "I won't forget you," I whispered, but my voice came out tighter than I intended. The boy grinned and ran back to his table, where his siblings waited. I tucked the star carefully into the pocket of my apron, touching it briefly as though making a silent promise. Everywhere I looked, there were small moments that softened the ache inside me, tiny acts of gratitude, laughter rising from people who rarely had reasons to laugh, the clinking of utensils against plates filled with food we'd made together. At one point, Miguel handed out hot cocoa topped with mountains of whipped cream, and the entire room erupted in cheers. The longer I cooked, served, and moved among them, the more a strange, unexpected feeling unfurled in my chest. One I hadn't felt earlier that morning when my father's words hit me like a slap. It wasn't the ache of being unwanted. It wasn't the numbness of being dismissed. It was something warmer, softer, stronger. A sense of belonging I hadn't realized I'd been starved for. Because here, no one cared about appearances. No one cared if I smelled like roasted squash or if my hair was tied back with a rubber band. No one cared that I didn't have perfect makeup or a curated wardrobe or a fiancé with a jawline built for magazine covers. They saw me, not the uniform I wore, not the status I lacked, not the image I didn't fit. And in their gratitude, in the easy way they embraced the meal we'd made, I felt something like acceptance. If my parents had walked in right then, they would have criticized the mismatched chairs, the informal plating, the lack of ambiance. Lydia would have rolled her eyes at the paper decorations and the absence of expensive centerpieces. They would have judged everything: the guests, the food, the environment, because none of it was wrapped in the gloss they worshipped. But to me, this was the closest thing to a real family gathering I'd had in years. Not perfect, not polished, not staged, just real. Around noon, the rush began to slow. People lingered with their coffee cups, children played with leftover craft supplies, and volunteers sat down to enjoy the same meal we'd served. I finally stepped outside for a breath of air, leaning against the cool brick wall. My apron was stained, my hair was a mess, and my feet ached from hours of standing. But my heart felt strangely full. I thought about Thanksgiving at my parents' house, the chandelier lighting that was always too bright, the stiff silence during dinner, the unspoken tension, the constant comparison to Lydia. And for once, the idea of being absent from that table didn't hurt. For the first time in my life, Thanksgiving felt meaningful. Because it wasn't about image, it wasn't about being good enough. It wasn't about pleasing people who never actually saw me. This Thanksgiving belonged to me not because I hosted it, but because it was the first time I celebrated a holiday without feeling like an outsider in my own family. Standing there with the cold air brushing against my cheeks and the paper star still tucked safely in my apron, I realized something quietly, undeniably true. I didn't need my family to feel like I belonged. I already had a place where I mattered, and maybe that was enough. The morning after Thanksgiving, my apartment was still wrapped in the softened quiet of early dawn. I had gotten home late, exhausted, but in the kind of way that fills rather than empties you. My apron from the outreach event still hung over the back of a chair, faint traces of cinnamon and nutmeg lingering in the air. I'd set my alarm for 8, hoping to give myself at least a few extra minutes of sleep before heading to the restaurant again. But at 3 a.m., the universe, or rather, my family had other plans. A thunderous, violent bang 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 shook my door so loudly I jolted upright in bed, heart hammering. For a moment, I thought something terrible had happened. Fire. Accident. Emergency. It had to be. No one knocks like that unless the world is ending. Still half asleep, I stumbled to the door, tightening my robe around me. Hello? Before I could even touch the handle, another barrage of pounding rattled the frame. Elena, open the door now. My father's voice thundered. I froze. Dad? At 7 in the morning? My stomach twisted into a knot. Nothing good ever came from my parents showing up unannounced. I cracked open the door just enough to see who was there, and my breath caught. Standing in the hallway was the entire family. Dad, face red, jaw clenched. Mom, with her trademark look of disappointment preloaded. Lydia, arms crossed, irritation practically vibrating off her. And next to her, a man I recognized only from Instagram photos. Tall, polished, impeccably dressed at 7 a.m. Andrew Whitlock. Her fiancé, 32. A tech consultant from Seattle. Before I could process why they were all here, Dad shoved the door wider and marched inside as if he owned the place. The others followed, filling my small living room with a storm of perfume, cologne, and judgment. I blinked, still trying to wake up fully. What are you all doing here? Dad spun around, eyes blazing. Why did you tell Grandma that your parents didn't let you come? His voice boomed through the apartment. Now the whole family thinks we banned you. They think we hate you, Elena. I stared at him, stunned. I didn't say anything to Grandma. You are always causing trouble. Mom snapped, brushing past me to inspect my apartment like it personally offended her. Always playing the victim. He's fine, Leonard. Lydia rolled her eyes dramatically. Seriously, Elena? This Thanksgiving is mine. It was my event. My chance to introduce Andrew to the family, and you couldn't just not ruin it? I opened my mouth, still groggy, but growing more alert and more angry. I didn't ruin anything. You told me not to come. Dad cut me off. We told you why. You know how important image is. You didn't have to go blaming us to Grandma. I didn't. But they weren't listening. They weren't here to listen. They were here to unload. To accuse. To make me small enough to fit back into the role they preferred. Mom pointed at my apron hanging on the chair. See? This is the problem. You care more about this place, these people, this ridiculous charity thing, than your own family. Something in me flinched, but not with guilt. With recognition. With the clarity of someone who finally sees a pattern for what it is. I inhaled slowly. I didn't tell Grandma anything. If she asked where I was, maybe she's just wondering why her granddaughter wasn't invited. Lydia scoffed loudly. Oh, please, stop being dramatic. This Thanksgiving is about me and Andrew. You always find a way to make things about you. I stared at her, incredulous. Lydia, I stayed home because Dad literally said my uniform would ruin your. And then it happened. Andrew, who had been silent until now, lifted his gaze from the floor and finally looked at me, really looked. His eyes narrowed not with anger, but with something like recognition. Wait, he said quietly but firmly, stepping forward. Hold on. Everyone stopped talking. He pointed slightly, studying my face. Are you Elena Brooks? My eyebrows pulled together. Yes? He blinked. The Elena Brooks? The sous chef? From Alder Street Kitchen? The room fell into a sudden, heavy silence. Dad turned to him, confused. Mom's expression flickered with something like concern. Lydia's brows knit together as if her fiancé had just spoken another language. I nodded slowly. I work there, yes. Andrew exhaled, stepping even closer. I've tasted your food. Lydia blinked. What does that mean? He ignored her. I attended the charity event there last year. The mushroom risotto. You made that, didn't you? My heart skipped. Yes. Andrew's eyes widened. I'm not exaggerating, it was one of the best dishes I've ever had. I still talk about it. To helpen and Reese's dime. The silence in the room shifted, no longer loud with accusation, but thick with shock. Dad stiffened. Mom's mouth dropped open slightly. Lydia's expression contorted into a mix of disbelief and irritation. And I, still in my robe, hair messy, sleep lines on my cheek, could only stand there, stunned. For the first time in my life, in my own living room, in front of the very people who had spent years belittling me, the spotlight swung in my direction. Not Lydia's. Mine. And no one seemed ready for that. For a full beat, no one in my living room moved. It was as if Andrew's words had struck some invisible tuning fork in the air, and the vibration of it echoed through everyone except me. I stood frozen, my hands still gripping the belt of my robe, unsure whether I was supposed to speak, smile, apologize, or simply disappear. But Andrew didn't give anyone time to recover. He took a slow breath, still studying me with a kind of stunned recognition that felt entirely foreign coming from someone in Lydia's world. Then he said, more firmly this time, "I'm serious. I had your mushroom risotto at the charity dinner last year. I've traveled to conferences all over New York, Chicago, San Francisco, and I still remember that dish. I actually tried to recreate it twice at home. Failed miserably, both times." Lydia's jaw dropped so fast I half expected it to hit the floor. "Andrew, what are you talking about? It was just some event for homeless people." Andrew glanced at her, unimpressed. It was a culinary outreach event hosted by Alder Street Kitchen. A lot of the chefs volunteered. It wasn't just charity, it was talent, real talent. A muscle in Lydia's cheek twitched. She stepped slightly in front of him, like she needed to physically block his view of me. "Andrew, she's just..." Dad cut in, waving his hand as if shooing away a fly. "It's nothing special. It just cooks. She cooks. Some people like it. That's it." Mom added quickly, "What's so terrible? Plenty of people can make risotto. She's always been average in that kitchen stuff." I swallowed, my throat tightening, but not from hurt this time. From disbelief. From watching years of quiet labor, passion, bruises, burns, and lost sleep reduced to average in front of a man who had just said the complete opposite. Andrew turned toward my parents slowly, eyebrows lifting with a kind of cool astonishment. "With respect, that dish wasn't average. I still think about how she layered the broth, the earthiness of the mushrooms, the balance of acidity. You don't forget food like that." The room went unnervingly still. My father's face flushed a deeper, uncomfortable shade. Lydia looked like she might spontaneously combust. My mother clutched her purse strap tighter, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't the one shrinking. I wasn't folding myself smaller. I wasn't apologizing for taking up space. It wasn't me who felt out of place in my own home. It was them. Lydia whipped toward me, eyes sharp. "Is this a joke, Elena? What, did you tell him to say this? Are you trying to embarrass me?" I shook my head, still stunned. "I didn't even know he was there last year." Andrew nodded. "It was a big event. Lots of people. I wasn't expecting to run into the chef today, but, well, here we are." He gave a brief, genuine smile, something warm, something appreciative. Something Lydia clearly wasn't used to seeing directed at anyone but her. She recoiled as if the compliment itself burned her. "Are you seriously praising her cooking right now? Andrew, this conversation is getting ridiculous." "What's ridiculous?" Andrew replied, his tone firm but even. "Is pretending she's not good at what she does." He looked at me again. "Actually, she's one of the most memorable chefs I've encountered, and I've met a lot." Dad scoffed. "Andrew, she's a kitchen worker. Don't romanticize it." Andrew's expression hardened. "She's a sous chef at one of the top restaurants in Portland. That's not a kitchen worker. It takes training, skill, discipline. The way she executed that risotto, honestly, a lot of restaurant chefs can't achieve that level of balance." Eyes also king. My mother cleared her throat, her voice strained. "Well, maybe it was just that one dish. A lucky moment." Andrew didn't look away from them. "No one gets lucky with risotto." A silence dropped so thick it felt like fog. Heavy. Dense. inescapable. And for once, it didn't suffocate me. It suffocated them. My parents glanced around the room nervously, as if searching for a way to regain control of the narrative. Lydia's lips tightened into a thin, furious line. The energy that had entered my apartment like a storm loud, accusing, self-assured began to deflate, slowly, painfully, embarrassingly. I stood there watching it all happen, still barefoot, still uncombed, still in a robe with a loose belt, and yet somehow, I wasn't the one looking unprepared. I wasn't the disappointment. I wasn't the mess in the room. Lydia stepped forward again, desperate to reclaim the attention she was losing. Andrew, you don't understand. Elena always makes things dramatic. She has this habit of making herself look. Andrew raised a hand. Stop. His tone was quiet, but it silenced her instantly. I'm not praising her to upset you. I'm telling you what I tasted. What I remember. He turned back to me. Your cooking made me stop eating halfway just to appreciate the flavor. Most chefs don't manage that. Heat swelled in my chest, not from embarrassment this time, but from something unexpected. Validation. Recognition. And it didn't come from someone who owed me anything. It didn't come from pity or obligation. It came from honesty. Dad muttered something under his breath. Mom pursed her lips. Lydia stared at Andrew, like she didn't recognize him anymore. But the strangest part was how calm I felt. All the shame I had walked into this morning with, all the guilt, all the smallness, felt like it had cracked open and spilled out onto the floor. The embarrassment that should have been mine was suddenly hanging on their shoulders instead, heavy and awkward. The room may have been silent, but the shift was deafening. For the first time in my life, I wasn't shrinking from their judgment. They were shrinking from the truth. And the truth, spoken aloud by someone they respected more than me, was simple. I was worth more than the box they'd spent years trying to keep me in. The shame wasn't mine anymore. And they knew it. The silence that followed Andrew's unexpected praise lingered in the room like smoke from a fire no one remembered starting. For one suspended moment, it felt as if everything might finally shift, like maybe, just maybe, someone had cracked open a door my family had kept bolted shut my entire life. But I should have known better. Dad cleared his throat loudly, straightening his jacket as if brushing off invisible dust. Mom adjusted her scarf, regaining that rigid posture she wore like armor. Lydia smoothed her hair, chin lifting in a practiced, poised motion. And just like that, the moment dissolved. Their discomfort morphed into something far more familiar. Not reflection. Not apology. Not even shame. But calculation. Dad exhaled sharply. Anyway, that's not why we're here. I blinked. It's not? Mom stepped forward, adopting the tone she used whenever she wanted something but didn't want to appear like she wanted it. We came because Lydia's Christmas dinner needs your help. My stomach dropped, not with surprise, but with an almost bitter confirmation. Of course they weren't here to clear the air. Of course they weren't here because they feared they'd hurt me. Of course they weren't here because they wanted to understand anything Andrew had just revealed. No, they were here because they needed something. They always came when they needed something. Lydia folded her arms, tilting her head with an expression I'd seen my whole life, half entitlement, half impatience. Our caterer canceled last minute. Totally unprofessional. She glanced over her shoulder at Andrew, as if seeking backup, but he remained still, silently observing. Anyway, we need someone to handle the menu. You can do it. You're good at this stuff. Good at this stuff, she repeated, like cooking was a simple hobby I tinkered with on weekends. Dad jumped in, already pacing as if strategizing. We want a full, elegant menu. 10 courses. High-end, something people will talk about. Mom added. And it needs to photograph well. Lydia's planning a holiday album for her Instagram. The table has to be perfect. Lydia nodded. Right. I need everything aesthetic. White plates, gold accents, warm lights. Styled dishes. Oh, and can you also do the table decor? The last vendor was a disaster. I stared at them. All 3 of them. Words tangling in my throat, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I suddenly saw the scene for what it truly was. They hadn't come because Andrew praised me. They hadn't come because they realized they'd excluded me. They hadn't come because Thanksgiving had collapsed without me. They'd come because their Christmas image was falling apart, and in their minds, I was the quickest, cheapest fix. A default solution. A utility. A tool. Mom's voice sharpened. We expect you to handle this. Family helps each other. That last sentence almost made me laugh. The irony of it, the audacity. Lydia, growing impatient with the tension she wasn't controlling, stepped forward. Look, you're good at cooking. Consider it a favor. No one's inviting you. Translation or not, the meaning hit the same. You're not invited, just useful. Something deep inside me tightened, not anger, but a quiet, piercing clarity. Their tone, their posture, their entitlement. This was a script they'd rehearsed for years. I'd played my part dutifully, shrinking myself to keep the peace, offering without being asked, accepting the scraps of affection they tossed my way. But today felt different. Maybe it was Andrew's praise. Maybe it was the warmth of yesterday's outreach event. Maybe it was the paper star still tucked into my apron in the next room. Maybe it was simply time. Whatever the reason, I didn't feel small anymore. Still, I didn't show it. Instead, I looked at them with a softness, so subtle it bordered on serene. A softness they mistook instantly for surrender. Okay, I whispered, letting the syllables fall lightly between us. I'll take care of it. 3 heads immediately lifted. Dad exhaled with relief. Good. Mom relaxed, her posture melting back into ease. At least you're being reasonable. For ditters. Lydia's irritation transformed into triumphant smugness. See? I knew you wouldn't ruin my Christmas. They all smiled as if a weight had been lifted, their weight, the one they'd placed on me without asking. And yet, the only person in the room who didn't mirror their satisfaction was Andrew. He was watching me with narrowed eyes, thoughtful, almost analytical. Like he sensed something beneath my calm. A current they couldn't feel. A shift they hadn't earned. Elena, he said softly. Are you sure? Lydia snapped her head toward him. Andrew. What? He didn't look away from me. Not for a second. There was a flicker there, a recognition that the quiet I wore wasn't submission, but something else entirely. Something he couldn't yet name. Something that, deep down, I knew was finally beginning to rise. I offered him a small, almost imperceptible smile. Yes, I said, leave it to me. It started mated and Bretta. He studied me another moment, as though trying to read a language no one else realized I was speaking. But my family, my image-obsessed, self-assured, wildly predictable, family missed all of it. To them, my answer was proof. I was still the Elena they'd always known. The obedient one. The accommodating one. The invisible one. The one who could be summoned when needed and dismissed when not. They left my apartment with an air of victory, already chatting about color palettes and table runners as they filed out the door. And I stood there in the quiet that followed, feeling something shift so deeply inside me it was almost seismic. They thought I'd said yes, because I was theirs to command. They thought I would show up because I always had. They thought I was still the girl who'd shrink to fit their picture-perfect frame. But they were wrong. Very, very wrong. After my family left, taking their perfume-clouded judgment and shallow relief with them, my apartment returned to stillness. But the silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt clarifying, like the air after a storm, washed clean and sharper than before. I stood in the middle of my living room for a long moment, letting the quiet settle in my bones. They had no idea. They had absolutely no idea who I really was, or what my life actually looked like outside the narrow version they'd written for me. To them, I was the daughter who cooked because she wasn't good at anything else. The one who worked in a kitchen because she couldn't handle a real job. The one who was useful when needed and invisible the rest of the time. But the truth they had never asked about, never cared to learn, never thought was worth knowing was far bigger than that. Bigger than their assumptions. Bigger than their expectations. Bigger than the tiny box they kept trying to squeeze me into. I wasn't just a sous chef. I was a co-owner of Alder Street Kitchen. The position wasn't flashy. It wasn't something I bragged about online or slipped into conversations to impress anyone. It was something I earned quietly, with years of sweat, patience, and a vision that my head chef believed in long before my family ever believed in anything I touched. And I wasn't just someone who executed recipes. I was the creative mind behind half the menu: the winter braised duck, the miso butter halibut, the caramelized shallot tart that had people lining up outside before opening hours. I'd spent countless nights experimenting, adjusting, refining, scribbling notes in the margins of worn recipe journals, just like Grandma taught me. Just last month, one of the visiting Michelin consultants had pulled me aside after tasting my work. He'd said, "There's a signature in your food. A soul. Not many chefs have that." He asked when I planned to open my own restaurant. He asked if I'd be ready for a formal review within the next year. He said my flavors were memorable. That word again. Memorable. It was strange how people who didn't know me at all could see me more clearly than the people who raised me. But maybe that was the point. People who don't carry pre-written narratives are the ones who see you for who you really are. My parents had no idea a Michelin-starred evaluator even knew my name. They had no idea I had business plans drafted on my laptop, concepts, budgets, potential neighborhoods. They had no idea I had investors quietly interested, waiting for the right moment. They had no idea, because they never asked. Because they never thought I was worth asking about. Their ignorance wasn't my burden anymore. It was simply theirs. I walked into my kitchen, turning on the soft under-cabinet lights. The apartment glowed with a warm amber tone. In the corner sat a stack of items for our upcoming Christmas Eve outreach event: spices, baking supplies, bags of rice and potatoes, stacks of to-go containers, and little knitted gloves, donated by a women's shelter. That was where my energy belonged. Not in rescuing Lydia's aesthetic Christmas dinner. Not in being their backup plan. Not in stepping into the same cycle that had drained me for years. I pulled out my notebook, flipping through pages of menu ideas for the Christmas Eve service: gingerbread loaves, creamy corn chowder, roasted chicken with rosemary, cranberry, vinaigrette salad. My handwriting looped across the page, confident and sure. This was my world. My purpose. My place. And if my family refused to see that, as they had always refused, then that was their choice, not mine. If they want to see me as a maid, I murmured to myself, tapping my pen thoughtfully. That's their limitation. Not my identity. It felt good to say it out loud. Solid. True. Like claiming something I'd been quietly building for years. The rest of the day passed in a hum of preparation. I visited the restaurant, met with volunteers, checked inventory, adjusted the cooking schedule. My team greeted me with warmth, real warmth, not the conditional, image-obsessed kind my family specialized in. When I told the staff I'd be spending Christmas Eve at the restaurant again, they smiled, not questioned. When I finalized the dessert menu, they offered ideas, not judgment. When I shared extra cookies with a group of teens who stopped by early, they hugged me like I was family. These were my people. This was my family. That night, when I got home, my phone buzzed with messages from Lydia. "Elena, where are you? We need to confirm plating. Are you ordering ingredients? Dinner is very important." Hello? I stared at the screen blankly. After everything, after the way they'd spoken to me, dismissed me, used me, they were still talking to me like I was an unpaid intern. For a moment, old habits tugged at me: reply quickly, reassure them, smooth things over, avoid conflict. But something stronger rose up inside me, the same strength that had grown quietly as I cooked for people who appreciated every bite, the same strength Andrew had unknowingly ignited when he recognized my work, the same strength that had been building since the moment I whispered, "Yes, I understand," into the phone and realized I meant something entirely different. I opened the settings on my phone. My thumb hovered for a second. Then I switched my phone to Do Not Disturb. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was profound. This was the first real boundary I'd ever set with them. A small button. A tiny choice. But it felt like stepping through an unlocked door I hadn't dared to open before. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. Not them. Not their approval. Not their version of me. Just me. And the quiet that followed felt like the beginning of freedom. Christmas morning arrived not with the soft, Peaceful, quiet, most families enjoyed, but with the relentless vibration of my phone against the nightstand. The sun hadn't even risen yet. It was 6 a.m. when the screen lit up for the first time. Then again. And again, until it flashed so constantly that my entire bedroom glowed like a malfunctioning traffic light. I didn't check the caller ID. I didn't need to. I knew exactly who it was. I rolled over, exhaled slowly, and let the phone ring. Then, I slid it into airplane mode. Today wasn't for them. Today was for people who actually valued a warm meal. People who didn't see food as decoration. People who didn't see me as a tool. By the time I walked into the restaurant at 6:45, the kitchen was already alive with early volunteers. The air was thick with the scent of baking bread and simmering broth. Steam fogged the windows. Someone was already playing soft holiday music through a battered speaker. The energy was warm, real, human. My second in command, Jessa, waved me over. "Merry Christmas, boss." "Merry Christmas." I smiled, tying my apron. "Let's feed a city." While my Christmas morning was unfolding in warmth and purpose, another version of Christmas, one filled with chaos, ego, and unraveling, was erupting across town in my parents' perfectly staged dining room. At Lydia's house, 6 a.m. The first wave of panic hit when Dad tried dialing me. "Elena, where are you?" Ring. No answer. "Have you started cooking yet?" Ring. Straight to voicemail. "The guests are coming." Ring. Nothing. Mom paced the kitchen, clutching her pearls like they were rosary beads. Why isn't she answering? She promised. I knew she would ruin this. Dad barked orders like he was managing a corporation on fire. Call her again. Wake her up. Do something. It just Henri. Lydia stood frozen in her satin robe, eyes glued to her Instagram feed where she'd already teased a luxury Christmas dinner reveal. There were thousands of likes, hundreds of comments, and not a single dish prepared. "Where is she?" Lydia screeched. "She said she'd take care of it. This is my Christmas post. We have a schedule, we have lighting planned." Andrew, already dressed, leaned quietly against the doorway, arms crossed, observing the meltdown with growing unease. "Did you even confirm with her? Or did you just tell her to handle everything?" Lydia spun toward him. "Same thing." He raised an eyebrow. "I don't think it is." She ignored him. 6:40 a.m. Catastrophe has shown. The backup caterer, a last-minute company Dad had frantically booked, sent a message. "We're so sorry. Our truck broke down in Salem. We cannot make it." Lydia screamed. Mom gasped. Dad cursed. Andrew quietly exhaled through his nose. 7:15 a.m. Catastrophe #2. The dining table styled by Lydia herself after firing 2 decorators looked disastrous in the morning light. The gold chargers clashed with the maroon napkins. The candles stood crooked. The centerpiece, which was supposed to look rustically elegant, instead resembled a dead shrub wrapped in fairy lights. Lydia burst into tears. "This looks like a funeral for a pinecone." "It's sober," and purdited. 7:30 a.m. Catastrophe #3. Relatives began arriving early, excited, chattering, holding gifts and bottles of wine. They expected a 10-course Christmas feast. They expected something lavish, Instagram-worthy. And they expected Elena. The whispers started immediately. "Where is Elena? She's the chef in the family. Why isn't she here cooking? Did they not invite her? Oh my God. Did they embarrass her again?" Dad tried to laugh it off. No, she's just running late." Mom forced a smile. "She loves to help the family. She'll be here soon." But the truth simmered, visible in their stiff posture, their darting eyes, the way they kept glancing at the door with growing dread. Meanwhile, at the restaurant, 8 a.m. I ladled warm soup into bowls, adding a sprinkle of herbs. A little girl held out a plate with both hands, eyes shining. "Thank you, chef." Thanks for watching." I smiled, brushing a stray hair from my face. "Eat as much as you'd like." My phone turned off, lay buried deep in my locker. I didn't need their chaos. I didn't need their panic. I didn't need their guilt. I had chosen my Christmas, and this one mattered. 9:15 a.m. Catastrophe #4. Lydia checked her phone again. 26 missed calls to Elena. 0 responses. She called again, and again, and again. When the total reached 37 calls, her voice cracked. Why isn't she answering? She has to answer. Andrew looked at her calmly. Maybe she doesn't. Lydia swung toward him. She's my sister. Andrew's eyes hardened just slightly. Is she? Or is she the person you use when something goes wrong? Lydia froze. Then she turned away from him, furious tears in her eyes. 10:10 a.m. Catastrophe #5. The peak. All the relatives were now gathered. Hunger simmered with gossip. Someone asked loudly, "Where's Elena? Surely she wouldn't miss this." Another whispered, not quietly at all, "They probably treated her badly again." Someone else added, "That girl works so hard. They never appreciate her." Dad clenched his jaw. Mom flushed bright red. Lydia covered her face. Then quietly, almost too quietly, Andrew picked up his coat. Lydia's head snapped toward him. "Where are you going?" He looked at her with a calmness that hurt more than anger. "To spend Christmas where people treat others with kindness." Before Lydia could speak, Andrew walked out the front door. He didn't look back. 10:30 a.m. Total collapse. In a dining room filled with hungry, confused relatives. With no food, no centerpiece, no plan, and no Elena. Every lie, every manipulation, every selfish expectation finally crashed over them like a wave they had created themselves. They wanted a perfect Christmas. Instead, they got the Christmas they earned. Meanwhile, back at the restaurant, as I placed another tray of roasted chicken onto the serving line, a volunteer approached. "Chef, someone's asking for you." I wiped my hands on my apron, walked out to the dining area, and felt my breath catch. Because standing near the entrance, holding a small box of pastries and wearing a gentle, knowing expression, was Andrew. He lifted the box slightly when he noticed me. "I brought something." Behind me, the kitchen doors kept swinging open and shut as volunteers rushed in and out, carrying trays of roasted vegetables and baskets of warm rolls. Children wove between tables, paper ornaments clutched in their small hands. Laughter filled the air, a chorus of raw, imperfect joy. The kind that warms a room without trying. I blinked, still catching up. "Andrew, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at?" He smiled, just a little. "The dinner I was supposed to attend isn't happening." Then he lowered his voice, glancing around at the lively room. "And honestly, I think Christmas is better here." Something in my chest fluttered, something I tried to ignore. But before I could respond, a small boy tugged on my apron again. The same one from Thanksgiving. "Chef. We made cards." He held up a handful of crooked, colorful drawings. Stars, trees, stick figures with giant smiles. One had my name Elena written in shaky red marker, surrounded by tiny hearts, and what I think was supposed to be a gingerbread man. My throat tightened. "These are beautiful," I said, kneeling to meet his eyes. "Thank you." He beamed and ran off toward his siblings, who were already waving their cards proudly at Andrew as if he, too, belonged here. And to my surprise, he didn't seem out of place. He crouched down, gently accepting the drawings and asking the kids questions, his gaze softening with every answer. Inside Lydia's world, Andrew had always seemed like a polished accessory, a handsome man in a designer coat, a photo-ready prop for her curated perfection. But here amid paper stars, donated jackets, and trays of food he looked startlingly sincere, almost relieved, even. I led him to a quieter corner near the coffee urns. "So," I began, wiping my hands on my apron, "you walked out." He nodded slowly. "I did." "What happened?" Andrew sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Honestly, I didn't recognize the people standing in that living room. They treated you like," he paused, jaw tightening, "like an appliance they could plug in whenever something went wrong. No consideration. No gratitude, just expectation." "That's normal," I murmured, looking away. "That's how it's always been." It shouldn't be, he replied softly. I didn't know how to answer that. Behind us, someone shouted, Chef, the mac and cheese just came out perfect. The volunteers nearby cheered. Another guest approached, a woman with silver hair and a knitted hat, gently resting a hand on my arm. Thank you for doing this every year, she said. You have no idea how much it means. Moments like that, pure, heartfelt, unpolished gratitude wrapped around me like the warm glow of a hearth. Andrew watched it all with wide, almost reverent eyes. This, he said quietly, is real. He gestured toward the tables where families laughed, children played with donated toys, and elderly couples shared slices of pie like it was the rarest thing they'd tasted. This is Christmas. Not whatever was happening back there. I exhaled a slow breath, letting his words sink in, letting the contrast settle fully inside me. Because back at Lydia's house right now, there was chaos, hunger, shame, arguments, phone calls going unanswered, a table with nothing to offer except expensive plates and unfulfilled expectations. Families sitting around an empty space where dinner should have been. A groom to be walking out the door because he'd finally seen behind the curtain. And here, there was warmth. Here, every plate was full. Here, every person felt seen. Here, no one cared whether my uniform ruined a single photo. Here, I mattered. Andrew opened the pastry box, revealing a dozen imperfect ginger cookies, slightly uneven, clearly homemade. I tried baking, he admitted. I don't really know what I'm doing. But I thought maybe these could go with the dessert table. I laughed, surprised. You baked these? He shrugged. Don't judge me too hard. I followed a YouTube video. I picked one up and took a bite. It was slightly burnt around the edges, too soft in the center but sweet. Honest, earnest. They're good, I said truthfully. Really good. Andrew's smile softened. I wanted to bring something. After everything, it felt wrong to show up empty-handed. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the sounds of laughter and clinking dishes filling the comfortable space between us. The scent of cinnamon drifted through the air. Snow tapped gently against the windows. Andrew, I began quietly. Why are you really here? He looked at me, really looked. Because you're the only person who seemed to understand what matters today, he said. And I wanted to be where things actually matter. My breath caught. And in that instant, with the soft chaos of kindness swirling around us, I realized something with absolute clarity, something I had never felt so sharply before. I had chosen the right Christmas. The right people. The right place. The right version of myself. I didn't need a seat at Lydia's table. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their twisted version of family. Here, in this crowded restaurant filled with strangers who felt like community, with volunteers who felt like siblings, with a man who despite everything saw me, I felt something I had been denied my entire life. Belonging. And for the first time in 30 years, the path ahead of me looked unmistakably clear. By late afternoon, the restaurant had quieted. The last trays had been emptied, the tables wiped down, and the tired but happy volunteers were packing up leftovers into containers for anyone who might need an extra meal that night. The warm buzz of the Christmas feast still hummed in the air like a lingering melody. I stepped outside for a breath of crisp winter air, tugging my coat tighter around me. Snow fell in slow flakes, softening the edges of the streetlights. For the first time in years, on Christmas Day, I felt peaceful. But peace rarely lasted long where my family was involved. I heard the commotion before I saw them, raised voices cutting through the quiet street like knives slicing fabric. Then the restaurant door flew open behind me. Elena. My father's voice thundered across the sidewalk, followed by the frantic clicking of my mother's heels and the high-pitched fury of Lydia's sobs. Andrew, who had been helping a few volunteers inside, stepped out and stiffened beside me. My parents stormed toward us, faces red, breath visible in the cold air. Lydia trailed slightly behind, makeup smeared, hair disheveled like the perfectly curated Christmas she'd envisioned had exploded in her hands. And it had. They didn't slow when they reached me. They didn't even catch their breath before the first accusation hit. You ruined our dinner, Dad shouted, pointing a shaking finger in my face. Do you know how embarrassed we were? Mom chimed in, voice shrill with indignation. I promised. I said I would take care of everything. Lydia pushed past them, mascara streaking down her cheeks. You made your parents and relatives lose face. Everyone asked where you were from. They thought you were trying to embarrass me. Their voices pounded against me like hail. But I didn't flinch. Not this time. I stood completely still, calm, steady, grounded in a way they had never seen. A way they didn't know how to fight. I waited until they ran out of breath, until the last echo of their outrage bounced off the snowy pavement. Only then did I speak. My voice was even. So quiet that, for a moment, they leaned in just to hear me. I didn't promise to cook, I said. I never said that. Dad scoffed. Don't lie, I said. I interrupted gently, leave it to me. They froze. All three of them. The words hung between us like a mirror they didn't want to look into. Slowly, painfully, I watched realization dawn across their faces. They had assumed. They had demanded. They had expected. Because that's what they always did. But they had never, I realized with a sharp, cold clarity, actually listened to me. I handled it, I continued. Just not in the way you wanted. I spent Christmas feeding people who genuinely needed a meal. People who actually appreciate the work I do. People who don't see me as a tool. Mom's mouth opened, then closed again. Dad's lips compressed into a thin, furious line. Lydia let out a choked sound, half disbelief, half rage. You ruined everything, she whispered. No, I said softly. I let everything fall exactly the way it needed to. A moment passed, a slow, stunned breath of winter air before I added. I'm not your personal chef. I'm not your emergency fix. I'm not your stagehand. And I am not going to keep sacrificing myself for your image. My father looked like he'd swallowed ice. My mother blinked rapidly, her facade cracking. Lydia shook her head, unable to accept a world in which she didn't command my compliance. You're being dramatic, Dad snapped. Family must. Andrews stepped forward, before he could finish. And when he spoke, his voice was low, but resonant like a truth dropped into a room that had never heard one before. I have never seen such selfishness, he said, eyes fixed on them. The way you treat Elena is unbelievable. She owes you nothing. Nothing. My mother gasped. Andrew? What are you saying? He didn't soften. I'm saying you don't deserve her. None of you do. Lydia stared at him as if he had slapped her. You're choosing her side? No, he said simply. I'm choosing the side of decency. Silence. Cold. Sharp. Perfectly clear. I reached into my coat pocket, my fingers brushing against the envelope I'd prepared last night, the one I'd written by hand, with shaking fingers and a steady heart. I pulled it out and held it toward them. This, I said, is for all of you. Mom frowned. What's that? My boundary. Dad snorted. Don't be ridiculous. I extended it further. It's a letter. Declaring that I'm stepping back. From all of you. From the expectations. The manipulation. The one-sidedness. I'm done. It's stated due, and, if you do order, it is 9. Mom's hand trembled as she took it. Lydia stared at the envelope as if it were a betrayal. Dad's jaw clenched so tightly the muscle twitched. You can't just walk away. Lydia whispered, voice cracking. I already did, I replied. Behind me, through the restaurant windows, I saw the faint silhouettes of volunteers cleaning up, people who had called me chef. People who had thanked me. People who had hugged me this morning. People who cared. I stepped back from my family literally and figuratively. This chapter is over, I said. I'm choosing myself now. The wind carried my words into the falling snow. Solid. Final. Freeing. Andrews stood beside me, not in front of me, not for me, but with me. And, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel afraid of losing my family. Because I finally understood. Family isn't who claims you. It's who values you. And they never had. 1 year later, on a crisp December evening, I stood in the kitchen of a place I once believed existed only in dreams. My own restaurant. Warm golden lights glowed against exposed brick walls. Pine garlands lined the windowsills. The scent of caramelized onions, rosemary, and freshly baked focaccia filled the air like a comforting embrace. The hum of laughter floated through the dining room, a soft, vibrant sound that felt like music. I had named the restaurant Ellie's Hearth, a quiet tribute to the childhood nickname only my grandmother ever used, a name that reminded me of where my love for cooking began, not in a polished, perfect household, but in a messy kitchen with flour on my face, my grandmother's gentle voice guiding my hands, and joy simmering in every pot. Tonight marked the restaurant's first Christmas Eve dinner service. And it was fully booked weeks in advance. Not because of flashy ads or influencers or curated perfection, but because people remembered the food. They remembered the warmth. They remembered me. The dining room was filled with faces that had become my new family over the year. Volunteers from the outreach events, neighbors, customers who'd followed me from Alder Street Kitchen, single parents who once stood in line for free meals, the elderly man who always requested extra rolls. The children who'd once made me paper stars now sat at a corner table, coloring their own holiday cards between bites. This was my community, my chosen family. The people who never asked me to shrink, never pressured me to be someone else, never judged the smell of smoke on my clothes. Jessa, now my sous chef, poked her head out of the kitchen. "Chef, the final course is ready for plating. You want to do the honors?" "Of course." I smiled, tightening my apron. The last dish of the night, Grandma's recipe for spiced apple bread pudding, elevated with a caramel whiskey sauce I'd perfected over the years, was waiting on the prep table. I spooned the warm sauce carefully, letting it cascade over the golden crust, the sweet aroma rising like a memory brought to life. As I plated the last portion, a hush fell over the kitchen, one of those quiet pauses where everyone feels the weight of a moment. I looked around at my team, at the bustling dining room beyond them, and then at the front door where, just last year, my family had stood screaming accusations in the snow. A life ago. A lifetime away. I carried the last plate out to the dining room myself. The room glowed with soft holiday lights, reflections dancing across warm wooden tables. A volunteer couple waved at me from near the fireplace. One of the kids held up a newly drawn Christmas card and mouthed, "Merry Christmas, Chef." I felt my throat tighten, but with joy, not pain. As I set the dessert down at the last table, the entire room erupted into applause. Not the performative kind. Not the shallow, camera-ready kind my family valued. But real applause. Spontaneous. Grateful. Human. I stepped back, letting the warmth wash over me. When the clapping settled and people returned to their meals and conversations, I drifted to the side of the room and simply watched. Watched the volunteers laughing together. Watched the older couple share bites of dessert. Watched children chase each other between tables, their hands sticky with caramel. Watched the friendships formed over a year of community and kindness. And for the first time in my life, I felt entirely, completely at peace. No chaos. No fear. No walking on eggshells. No phone vibrating with demands I couldn't meet. No shrinking to fit a mold that was never made for me. Just peace. Andrew had kept in touch over the past year, not romantically, not intensely, but quietly, respectfully. He'd apologized for the part he played that night at Lydia's house and later became a regular at the restaurant. He never overstepped. Never pushed. Just showed up. Supported, encouraged. Tonight, he sat at a small table near the window, reading a book while waiting for dessert. When our eyes met, he offered a gentle smile, the same warm, steady kind he'd given me a year ago when he said Christmas belonged here. For a moment, my past no longer felt like a place I needed to escape. It felt like a story I had finally rewritten. I stepped outside, letting the cold air kiss my cheeks. Soft snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, settling on the warm glow spilling from the restaurant windows behind me. Inside, my new family gathered around food I crafted from memory, love, and freedom. I thought about the moment everything changed. Not the confrontation. Not the shouting. Not even Andrew's words. But the simplest act I had ever done. One small choice. One boundary. Turning off my phone. That was the moment the door to my old life quietly, finally closed. And the door to this one began to open. I wrapped my coat tighter as the snowfall thickened. A warmth spread through me, deep, steady, anchored in the life I was standing in, not the one I left behind. The world didn't end when I walked away from them. It began. I whispered into the winter air, the words rising like a vow, like a sunrise. They thought I would always be submissive. But that Christmas, I turned off the machine and turned on my new life.